Hello. So we'll be looking at Chapter 5. Chapter 5 focuses on the goddess Aphrodite and then tangentially also looks at the god Hephaestus and the god Ares and the god Eros, who are all sort of associated in one way or another with Aphrodite. So, Aphrodite and Eros. Aphrodite and Eros are associated with desire and romance, mainly with desire, with physical desire. In fact, the word Eros in Greek means desire. And Aphrodite is primarily a figure of sexual attraction rather than romance, which involves physical attraction, but there's also something more. The Eros is either Aphrodite's son or companion. Now, Hesiod presents Aphrodite as coming out of the sea from the severed genitals of Uranos. In the Theogony, Eros actually predates Aphrodite. Eros is there from almost from the very beginning, and then Eros becomes an attendant or companion of Aphrodite. Later authors, pretty much every other author we have except for Hesiod, has Aphrodite as the daughter of Zeus and Dione, a minor goddess who doesn't really get, much in the way of myth. She appears like in a walk-on role in the Iliad. And the authors who have Aphrodite as the daughter of Zeus and Dione, I think the point of that is clear. They want to make Aphrodite subordinate to Zeus, whereas the Aphrodite in the Theogony is independent of Zeus and is actually quite powerful and seems to be not really directly under Zeus's control. Okay, so there is that movement. Those authors who have Aphrodite as the daughter of Zeus and Dione have Eros, or Cupid to give the Roman name, as the son of Aphrodite. The behavior of Aphrodite and Eros is fickle, representing the nature of desire. Right? I mean, the heart wants what the heart wants, and the line, the heart wants things that reason knows not of. Right? It's operating on a different wavelength than rationality. They are also associated with conflict and violence, as in Sophocles' Antigone, or as in the case of the Trojan War. Now, the reference in Antigone, the opening quote of the chapter, so like each chapter has a quotation or a section prior to the chapter itself. It's like a little preview. And the preview for Chapter 5 has this quotation from an ode or a song to love, to Eros, by the chorus in the Antigone. What has happened just prior to the chorus singing that song, Antigone is a young woman. She has decided that she must bury her brother who attacked the city of attacked the city of Thebes, is basically been declared a traitor, which he was because he was attacking his hometown, and he has been denied burial. Antigone figures she owes it to her brother to bury him, and besides the fact that he's dead, he's already paid the penalty of treason. So she does that contrary to the law. The king has made a proclamation that anyone trying to bury Polynices, her brother, will be executed, and she has received a sentence of imprisonment in a cave. She's going to be locked up in a cave where she will sort of die, presumably a natural death, within a few weeks, right? Because there'll be enough food for a day or two, but then after that goes away, she will likely die of starvation. That's the idea. And the reason, by the way, for that is she's popular, and if there's a public execution of her, right, like her head's chopped off or she's hanged or something like that, then there's likely to be a public outcry. But if, on the other hand, she is put into this cave, she was alive when she was put in there, and so the whole sort of ritual pollution that goes with such deaths does not fall on the king, right? The king, she was alive when we put her in the cave. If she died there, it's because the gods decided she deserved to die. After he's done that, and after she's left the stage, her fiance, the king's son, his name is Hymen, and Hymen comes in, and Hymen argues with his father, Creon, the king, and they have a big blowout. And then Hymen basically storms off after this. That's when the chorus sings this song to Eros, to love or desire. Because what desire, in this case the desire of Hymen for his fiancée Antigone, has broken up the family unit of Hymen the good son and Creon his father. Okay, so that's basically, in the chorus also, it's not in the little selection, but the chorus also asks that type of desire, that level of desire, not come upon the chorus. All right, so here we have a red figure, Skiphos. I'm not exactly sure what that is. It looks like it's just a cup of some sort, by the workshop of the Iliopersis painter. So this work looks like it comes from the same group of painters that painted a vase of the sack of Troy. That's what Iliopersis means. It's from around 375 to 350 BCE. It's a red figure vase, right? So it has reddish or orangish figures against a black background. And here we've got a woman. Her hands are bound behind her, and riding her back is Eros, or desire. He's covered her eyes. So there's sort of a game going on, and there appears to be, I mean, I can't imagine what else it is, on the ground in front of her. There appears to be a large white dildo, and I'm guessing the game that they're playing is Find the Dildo or something like that. So they're like pin the tail on the donkey. So now we're looking in the first section, the history section, which is going to focus on these four gods, and then a focus on Aphrodite and Homeric hymn number 5. There are two stories of Aphrodite's birth. She is either the daughter of Zeus and Dione, which most authors have, or she is produced from the castrated scrotal sac that lands in the sea, floats for a while, bubbles up, and out of it comes Aphrodite. Her title of Philomedes, or Philomades, represents her association with sexual desire unmitigated by social consideration. Now, Philomedes, Hesiod uses the word in the Theogony, and he says Aphrodite is called Philomedes, genital loving, because she came out of the genitals of Uranos. All right. There's that strong connection between Aphrodite and the genitals, and so that's why he used the word Philomedes. Now, the word Philomedes is an ambiguous word in Greek. The word can also mean laughter loving. So sometimes Aphrodite, when you read Homer, he'll refer to laughter loving Aphrodite. That word could also be genital loving, right? So the word in Greek actually serves it two functions. They're homophones. Now, this bit about unmitigated by social consideration, this again is tied to that statement that I mentioned before, that love has reasons that reason knows not of. In other words, love wants what it wants, and reason doesn't come into it, right? If someone falls passionately in love with someone else, they can sort of deny it. They can certainly make sure they don't act on that if they have strong enough will, but it's something other than rationality, right? It's something else that sort of seems to take over. And if you've ever fallen in love, it seems like the whole matter is out of your control, at least during that initial phase. And of course, this could lead to a breakup of a marriage, right? People are married, and then one or the other spouse or both spouses end up getting hit with a desire for someone else outside the marriage, and then of course the marriage collapses, right? So society wants to keep the marriage going, but desire does what it does. Here we have a marble relief from this is a panel. There are 3 panels altogether that make what's called the Ludovisi throne. It's around 460 to 450, so this is great classical art, classical period from about 480 to about 330. It shows Aphrodite coming out of the sea, right? So she's rising up and she's getting clad by, presumably these are the seasons, right? The horai, the hours of the seasons, and they are attendants of Aphrodite, and they are dressing her. That's presumably what's happening here. There are lots of statues, lots of artwork from the ancient world that show Aphrodite coming out of the sea. This seems to refer to the Hesiod account, where Aphrodite comes out of the scrotal sac that's landed in the sea, and she lands up on the island of Cyprus. Marriage and love. Brides prayed to Aphrodite before their wedding day, and not only that, but in hymns or songs about brides, brides are compared to Aphrodite, while the groom is compared to Ares. So brides are compared, they're the object of desire, and they're beautiful like Aphrodite, while the groom is compared to Ares, who of course is really sort of buff, physically fit young male god. So there's also a suggestion of aggression there, that the groom will basically take hold of the bride. I mean, there is some level of that in that attribution of Ares with the groom and Aphrodite with the bride. Aphrodite is often depicted with Harmonia, who is the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite. Harmony, peace. Peitho, persuasion, and the erotes. Now, eros is desire. The erotes are not just eros, but also figures like longing and desire. And the erotes are generally portrayed as little babies. So eros might be portrayed as a young adult or teen, and that's the way he's portrayed in Hesiod's Theogony. He looks like maybe a 16 or 18-year-old handsome youth, and he's got wings. Later authors are going to take Eros, and they're going to make him more like a little kid, like a preschooler or a first grader type 6-year-old kid. The erotes tend to be like little cherubim, right? Little babies with wings. And oftentimes in art, they're there just to, like, as a comic relief. They're not meant to make so much a serious statement about love. The winged nature of Eros and some of the erotes indicates that the emotions that Aphrodite inspires are impossible to restrain, right? Like birds, they can fly away. In Greek myths, the desire inspired by Aphrodite disrupts marriage more often than it sustains it. Now, this is important because Greek marriages were generally arranged marriages. We talked about this, in the last chapter. The father would make basically a deal with the groom for the marriage. And it is possible that the bride had never seen the groom before the marriage, or had maybe just met. So we're not talking about the bride marrying someone she's in love with. Basically, it's a partnership that will produce legitimate children, for inheritance purposes. But love is not really part of it, right? If the couple can get along, That's important. If they're madly in love with one another, they can be madly in love one day, and the next day they can be madly in hate, right? I mean, it's much more volatile. So Aphrodite does not represent the love that you would get in marriage. Now, when brides are getting married, of course, they want to inspire that desire in their husband. That's the idea, right? At the beginning of the marriage, right, the honeymoon phase, you want the desire to really be there. But in a stable marriage over time, you want to be able to get along with the other person rather than be madly in love with them. So here we have another red figure. This is a lekythos, which is an oil flask. So you would fill it with oil, and you would pour the oil as needed. Here we've got Aphrodite seated, and there are erotes. There's one flying down from above. There's one sitting on her lap who is breastfeeding. There is one sitting on this little, looks like part of a throne. And then there's one who's sort of standing on top of it, holding maybe a crown or something. It's unclear what that figure's carrying. There's also an attendant, maybe one of the graces or the hours, the attendants of Aphrodite, holding a swan. Birds are associated with Aphrodite, but the bird usually associated with Aphrodite are doves and not swans. But maybe this is an allusion to the lead in the swan story. That I don't know. Humor and laughter. Among the gods, Aphrodite is also connected with humor. And of course, Philomedes also means laughter-loving as well as genital-loving. Aphrodite's adulterous relationship with Ares gets her laughed at, but also represents the dangerous consequences of infidelity. So, this slide isn't going to explain this. Let me explain it, and let me suggest that you check out the Perseus website. So that's www.perseus.tufts.edu. If you go there, you can type in the word Odyssey in the search box and bring up the English translation of the Odyssey. And you want to go to Book 8, line 250. And for about 150 lines or so, we've got a story there of Aphrodite and her adulterous relationship with Ares getting caught by her husband Hephaestus and exposed to the gods, right? So she's exposed to the gods as being in this adulterous affair, and the gods all have a laugh over it. So this is in Odyssey, Book 8. Odysseus is at a banquet. This is after dinner entertainment. The singer tells the story of Aphrodite's relationship with Ares. Now, the bit about the dangerous consequences of infidelity, that story does not tell you that. That story basically presents infidelity among the gods as something of a lark. Hephaestus is angry that his wife's cheating on him, but he catches them. He basically exposes that they're trapped in a net, Ares and Aphrodite. He calls in the male gods who all come to his house to gawk at them and laugh at them because they're in bed together and they're naked and they can't get up. And then they're released. And Aphrodite goes off to Cyprus basically to get a beauty treatment, and Ares goes off to Thrace, the area that he's associated with, to basically start a war or start some fights. Okay? So there is no real consequence to this infidelity. Hephaestus is hurt. That's the extent of it. But in the Odyssey, infidelity is a key theme because Agamemnon, when he got home from the Trojan War, he was killed by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover. Okay. The other heroes, Idomeneus, came back to Crete, found his wife had actually moved on. He wasn't killed, but he basically had to leave. Diomedes, the same thing happens when he goes back to Argos. So infidelity it can be a problem. Odysseus has a wife, Penelope, who remains true to him, but he can't be entirely sure that's true, right? I mean, he sort of tests her and finds out that she has been true to him, but going into it, he can't be 100% sure. So for mortals, infidelity can be absolutely fatal. Among the gods, it's basically a joke because the ultimate threat is death, and the gods can't die. The myth of Aphrodite and Adonis furthered her association with laughter as represented in the Adenia, a festival celebrated only by women. Here, let me tell you a little bit about Aphrodite and Adonis. So Adonis is a young man. He is the son of Mira, who is a young woman who had incest with her father. She then gets transformed into a myrrh tree, Mira, and from the tree, from the bark of the tree, out pops 9 months later Adonis. Adonis grows up basically in the woods. He becomes a great hunter, and he and Aphrodite have an affair. She has a warning that Adonis is one day going to go out hunting. He's going to get attacked by a boar, and he's going to be killed. And so she tries to keep him from going out, but of course, hunting's what he does, and so time's to go hunting. He goes hunting. He does get killed. She then comes upon the dying body of her lover, and then a flower is created from this, and there's a festival held every year in honor of Adonis called the Adenia. Now, the bit about the humor or the laughter has to do with the Adenia, the festival, not with the story of Aphrodite and Adonis, which is a tragic story. So the vase here is another red figure Skyphos around the 5th century BCE. I've seen this. It's in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I mean, I've actually seen the physical thing. It's pretty big. It's probably about 2 feet high and maybe about 3 to 4 feet of width. So it's a huge bowl here with the two handles. Here we've got Paris, who is the figure with the helmet on, right here. We've got Eros here flying. Here we have Helen. And this figure is, according to the identification, is Aphrodite, though I don't know for sure how they can definitely identify her as Aphrodite. Now, Aphrodite does inspire Paris and Helen to get together. Helen willingly goes away with Paris. Paris does not, take her against her will. Now, that doesn't justify his action. He's still taking another man's wife, which is adultery, which is a crime. It's not considered a good thing, especially when you're talking about the royal family. But she does go along willingly. Now, why that woman behind her can't just be an attendant, why it has to be Aphrodite, that I don't know. There may be something that identifies it as the figure as Aphrodite, but I can't see what that is just looking at it. Civic harmony. Aphrodite with Peitho, persuasion, played a traditional role in the establishment and governance of cities. And there was a cult to Aphrodite in Athens where Peitho was a character also in that temple, that shrine. And there was a festival held called the Aphrodisia, and the Aphrodisia festival was in honor of Aphrodite and Peitho as figures that inspired a sort of mutual desire among citizens so that the city would run properly. Now, persuasion, the governance of the city requires persuasion in courts and assemblies. Now, if you have a monarchy, the king has to be persuasive. If the king can't get the message across, the people aren't with him. He has the power. He can put down revolts, right? He can kill everyone he wants to, but that's not sustainable. Ultimately, a good king is one who's going to be able to persuade people to be on board with him. The same thing with an oligarchy, which would be a rule by a few people. Again, they have to be able to persuade the masses. In a democracy like Athens, persuasion is key. Whoever is the most persuasive is going to win in the assembly and get things passed. Whoever can persuade in the court is going to get a favorable judgment from the jury. And the juries in in Athenian courts could be 100 to 300 people, right? They were not just 12 people. So you've got a group, and you need to basically get them on board. Aristotle in his Politics. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher, and one of the works that of Aristotle is called the Politics, and he says that the bonds of husbands and wives is you have the same sort of bond among citizens. And we're not talking about like mad desire here. We're talking about the ability to work together for a common purpose, right? They're a team. In Athens, Aphrodite was worshipped as Aphrodite Pandemos, along with Persuasion, for her role as unifier. And the cult of Aphrodite Pandemos, or Aphrodite and then Peitho, some people think it started under Solon, who was an Athenian ruler prior to the democracy. Some attribute it to a man named Cleisthenes, who in 508 created the ground rule for democracy, which by 500 became like an actual democracy. So I think if I had to guess, I would Solon was the great lawmaker. That may be why he gets the credit. But I have a feeling that this is Cleisthenes, because Cleisthenes, in taking the lead in establishing democracy, he has to sell that. He has to sell the idea of democracy, which in the ancient world was a pretty radical idea. Aphrodite was frequently worshipped in ports and harbors, anywhere where cooperation was necessary. Not only cooperation, but ports and harbors are where people get together. So, right, sailors come, right, they come into port, and they're looking for companionship, and there's a fair amount of sex that takes place in port cities as a result. So it's not surprising that Corinth, for instance, had a temple of Aphrodite that not only was a temple, but there were temple prostitutes. And we don't know exactly whether the temple prostitutes performed sexual acts as part of the worship of Aphrodite, like at a festival, or whether they basically were prostitutes connected to the temple as a way to raise money for the temple. That we don't know, but there were temple prostitutes in Corinth, which was a major port city in Greece. Again, these maps, the maps look fine, but they don't really help us out a whole lot. So Aphrodite her main cult center was on the island of Cyprus, which is right here. The main city is called Paphos. And you'll notice that Cyprus, though it is a Greek island, the people living on it speak Greek. It is very close to the Levant, to modern-day Lebanon, and also to Turkey. Modern-day Turkey, this is ancient Anatolia. So these are not Greek-speaking areas. They have their own goddess that they're worshiping, and that's all going to come together with the worship of Aphrodite on the island of Cyprus. So Aphrodite is going to be a much more composite goddess on Cyprus than she is in the rest of the Greek world, and since that's the main cult center, it's not surprising. The island of Lesbos, where the poet Sappho was from, it's why the word lesbian is referred to a woman who loves other women, is associated because of Sappho with Aphrodite. The island of Lemnos here is associated with Hephaestus. It was a volcanic island. There's also a story associated with Aphrodite where the Lemnian women had insulted Aphrodite. They got some sort of condition that made them smell really bad. It sounds like it's sort of like a period or something that wouldn't end, and the men didn't want to have anything to do with them. They then traveled elsewhere, probably to Thrace, to hook up with some women there. When they returned, everything had passed over, but the women really resented the men. They killed all the men. And then when the Argonauts come by, the Lemnian women seduce the Argonauts because basically they want to have children and there aren't any men on the island. Athens and Sparta are not particularly strong to Aphrodite, but Sparta, of course, is connected with Ares because it's a warrior society. Athens does have the shrine and cult of Aphrodite Pandemos, the pandemic or the citywide people-wide Aphrodite that represents civic unity. Hephaestus. Aphrodite's husband was Hephaestus, the god of metallurgy. Hephaestus is basically the fire god. He's also the god of metalworking, and he's the blacksmith god. So he's the god that makes things. And in art, you can generally recognize Hephaestus because he's got the tools that a blacksmith might have. He might have a hammer, he might have tongs, he might have something else. But that's going to be your tip-off. The artwork isn't going to really be able to show how he's lame. So he has few sanctuaries and festivals and was rarely worshipped. I think anywhere where there were workers, blacksmiths, or any other craftsmen, there likely was some sort of cult to Hephaestus. But it may not have been a big deal. It may have been a much smaller deal. But it wasn't totally absent. And in the city of Athens, which had a lot of craftspeople, Hephaestus seems to have been fairly well regarded. He was unique among the gods because of his lameness. Well, and there are two stories about Hephaestus. In one story, Hephaestus is the son of Hera alone. Gaia produced strapping youngsters by herself, right, like Uranus, and later like the giants, right, who were big and rough and tough and, well built. She produces a kid, but it's lame. And in this version, she kicks Hephaestus out of Mount Olympus. He grows up elsewhere and is resentful of the fact that his mom kicked him out. So he builds a chair and sends it to Mount Olympus for Hera. And I think he doesn't identify that it's from him. So this chair arrives. It is a great looking chair. And Hera thinks this is going to be a great throne, and she sits down on it, and she can't get up. She's stuck in the chair. And then they have to bring Hephaestus back to release her from the chair. And then as a reward for releasing Hera, he gets Aphrodite as a bride. In other versions, he's the son of Hera and Zeus, and he's lame because he was thrown out of Mount Olympus by Zeus, and he landed on the island of Lemnos, which is a rocky island, and basically shattered his leg. So one leg stopped growing, and he's lame, and he has to hobble about. And in that version, he basically gets Aphrodite because of all the stuff he builds for the gods. So he does all this stuff for the gods, and they owe him one. And this, by the way, is sort of a typical marriage setup. The groom gives something of value to the bride's family, to the bride's father, and then he gets the bride, right? Love doesn't have anything to do with it. And Hephaestus is not a handsome god. This is the typical setup. If you've read any medieval or Renaissance literature, this is the typical setup for a love triangle. You're going to have the successful businessman husband. He's probably going to be an older guy. He's going to be married to a hot young thing in her like 18 or 19 years old, maybe even younger. She, of course, isn't going to really be digging the fact that she's married to this old geezer, but is going to be seeking some action with some young guy. And that's what we have here. Right? We've got Aphrodite hooking up with Ares because she really doesn't like her husband a whole lot. Hephaestus is associated with fire and volcanoes. Lemnos was a volcanic island. And he's also associated with Mount Etna on Sicily, with manufacturing, with technology. He's an unlikely husband for Aphrodite, and I'd say he's not that unlikely a husband. This is a typical situation. He's a successful guy who's done something or given something of value to the bride's father, or, in the case of releasing Hera, to the bride's family, and so he, as a reward, he gets this beautiful bride. But it is something that's going to lead, of course, to a love affair with someone else. And here we have the return of Hephaestus to Olympus. So to get to get Hephaestus back to Olympus to release Hera, right? Because remember, he's not on Olympus. Dionysus is sent, and I'm guessing the figure over here that's bearded is Dionysus, but I don't know for sure. But we've got a satyr right here playing double flute, and here we've got another, like a younger satyr. Those are figures associated with Dionysus. Dionysus gets Hephaestus drunk. They basically plop him on top of a donkey or a mule, and he rides the mule up to Mount Olympus, right? So that's the setup. We know that this is what's being depicted here because we do have the guy on the sort of mule, but he's holding these tongs, and he also has something here that well, this actually is a thyrsus, right, which is the thing associated with Dionysus. It's what the worshippers of Dionysus sort of shake. So it's like a stick that has like a pine cone on the top of it. But the tongs definitely indicate, and it is possible that this leg here, which looks a little bit different, this may be supposed to represent the lame leg. The donkey or mule here appears to be aroused from what we can see below here. Ares. Ares is a war god. He is the son of Zeus and Hera. He and Aphrodite have 3 children, Deimos, which means terror, Phobos, which means fear, and those, I think, are the 2 names of the moons of Mars, I think, and Harmonia, harmony. And that seems to be odd one out, but presumably the daughter is closer to mom, right? And Aphrodite does have this connection of harmony, like Aphrodite Pandemos. But of course, the other 2 are definitely dad's sons. He represents aggression and destruction rather than courage or strategy. He's basically bloodlust in war. Now, if you're in the middle of a firefight, you have to be as ruthless as possible to survive, right? So in that moment, but Athena is the goddess of war strategy. This is the guy who's basically the blood and guts of war. His affair with Aphrodite represents the dangers of powerful emotions like lust and aggression. Well, the disruptive effect of such emotions, I would say. Dangers, I don't know, because again, the gods, since the gods are immortal, they don't suffer any consequences. Here at any rate, we have a statue showing Aphrodite and Ares. So Aphrodite here, she's pouring what looks like oil or something, maybe wine, into like a little cup here. Looks like a little dish. And then this is clearly Ares, right? He's got the helmet on and everything. And this is a votive relief. So this little marble relief would have been sort of set up as part of a prayer thing, wherever this was found. I mean, it doesn't say where it was found, but maybe a guy was going off to war or something like that. Or maybe this is a wedding votive, right? Because the groom is compared to Ares and the bride is compared to Aphrodite. Eros. Eros is either Aphrodite's son or her companion. We talked about that. Aphrodite's son, whenever Aphrodite herself is the daughter of Zeus and Dione, but her companion and not her son in the Hesiod account where Aphrodite comes out of the sea. He is the animating force that propels all creatures to reproduce and thrive. Right? That's the way he's even described by Hesiod, that he's the force that gets to all creatures. He is shown with arrows, which were believed to induce love. So if he shoots an arrow, it's a pointed arrow, then you're going to fall in love. If he shoots you with a dull arrow, then what you're going to be filled with is disgust and not love. So the opposite. Aphrodite and Eros attracted the attention of many philosophers who treated them as metaphors to explain passion, love, and lust. There is a famous dialogue of Plato's called the Symposium, which means the drinking party, in which they discuss what is Eros. And Socrates and the guests all come up with like a theory of what Eros is. And here we have a red figure vase showing Eros shooting a bow. And the reason we know it's not Eros and someone else is the wings, right? That's tip-off. Because Apollo also could be shown with a bow, but he would not have the wings. Now, in classical Athens, Eros was depicted as an adolescent boy. By the time we get to classical Athens, I think we're starting to move from Eros as an adolescent to Eros as a child. And certainly by the Hellenistic period, by 300 or so, he definitely is perceived more as like a little kid. And then later, he sort of multiplied into several like little cherubim. He represented a social practice wherein older men developed sexual relations with younger men, which was thought to benefit their development into mature citizens. So among the Spartans, young men were encouraged to have serious relationships with one another because they were going to fight in battles together, and a man would not let down his lover. He might let down like a casual friend, but he's not going to let down his lover. Among the Athenians and probably some other Greek city-states, it was not uncommon for older men to go to the gymnasium, which was where people would exercise, sort of like a health club. The word gymnasium means the place where you're naked, so Greek men would actually exercise naked. And older men would go there and basically ogle these younger men. And they would strike up relationships with them. And they appear to have been actual relationships in most cases. There may have been a sexual component as well, but it wasn't exclusively sexual. I mean, one of the things in ancient Greece, men and women lived in totally separate worlds. Women basically dealt with stuff at home, and men dealt with stuff in the public sphere. Right? They went out to work, whereas women stayed home to work. And as a result, they have two separate perceptions of how things go, right? Men see things from the civic perspective, women see things from a more personal or family perspective, and they're not spending that much time together except to sleep and to have sex. And so, as a result, men and women are not going to be friends. They might be sexual partners, but they're not going to be friends. But older men and younger men could be friends as well as lovers, right? So if you're going to have a relationship that involves sex and a relationship, it's probably going to be a same-sex relationship if you're a man, right? So it's a different perspective than we might have, even though, you know, I don't know anyone personally who is like horrified or, you know, by homosexual, you know, liaisons or activity, but it seems like from what the literature says that homosexual practice, at least among men and younger men, would have been much more common than it would be for us. I mean, the numbers, the percentage of people who would be, where that would be part of their lives, it seems to be a larger part. Later, Eros gets sort of broken up into a group of erotes, and these are cherubim, right? These are little babies with the wings. They're often chubby. They're very cute. They're often playful. And it says, by Roman times, infant cupids had little association with Eros' role as a god of desire. They're certainly less serious as representations. They're basically like cute little decorations. They're not, I mean, you could take desire really seriously, right? There are some love stories where people are passionately in love with one another, and it ends badly, right? You know, maybe there's a famous Japanese movie called Double Suicide, which is basically about this love pact. It's a forbidden love pact between the man and the woman, and there's no way that they can live together, but they can't really live apart, and they commit suicide. Well, that's serious, right? That's not a joke. It's, but what happens is the Cupid figures really do sort of turn love into a joke or a punchline. And so here we've got Eros, it says, chasing Atalanta. This says it's a red figure, Lekathos. It really seems to be a white ground figure, right? So it's got a white background with white figures rather than the red figure, which would be a red figure against a black background. So I think it's attributed to Duris, who is a vase painter. We have other stuff by him. We don't know for sure this is his because it's not signed, but it looks a lot like his other work. And Eros is clear, and actually Eros even says Eros right up there. But Atalanta, I don't know how we know this is Atalanta. My guess is that if we turn this around, we would actually see next to her the word Atalanta. Now, Atalanta was a young woman who was a virgin. She was a sort of tomboy figure, and her father set up a contest where if you were successful, if you defeated her in an athletic contest, then you would take her as bride. But if you lost, you were executed. So she didn't have too many suitors, but one suitor, a guy named Hippomenes, who did want to marry her, convinced, somehow won over Aphrodite, who gave him 3 golden apples, and they had a foot race. And as Atalanta, got ahead of him, he would throw the golden apple like maybe 50 yards further ahead. She would run to pick up the apple. That would give him time to catch up to her and then get ahead of her. And of course, the last time he did it, it was fairly close to him. He threw it maybe a little behind him, so she had to go back, and he crossed the finish line first. Now, in some versions of that story, right, there are different people who tell it. Some versions, she wanted him to win, and so she let him win, even though she also got the golden apples. In other versions, it's maybe less willing. But the point is, for ancient Greek women, the ultimate goal is marriage, right? You're going to get married. That's your goal. That's your life goal. And so Atalanta, though she wants to sort of remain a virgin tomboy figure, she can't really maintain that. And then we have a last little figure here, a group of cupids making perfume. This is what I mean by like the cute little cupids, right? These are not, there's nothing serious about this. Perfume would be associated with desire, but this is not meant to make any sort of serious. These are cute little cherubim. Just like when I was in high school, they had these cute little, they were almost like Cupid doll figures, and they were troll figures, and they all were like about love, and they were these cute little things, and it's all about, gushy love stuff. So this is wall painting, ultimately from Pompeii.